Hey, how's it going, guys? In our first modeling class, we're actually not going to do any modeling. I do want to talk about scene setup, though, because scene setup is super important to me. And while this modeling class is going to go over various modeling techniques, if you have any suggestions or want to, kind of work out how to model anything specifically, feel free to comment below. But meanwhile, I'm going to start modeling this Toyota 4Runner, mainly because it's got a lot of really interesting complex shapes in it, and I have one in my driveway. So if I need to just walk outside and take a look at a certain section of it, I can. So we'll get started, and I want to go over how to set up your scene properly, how to set up your orthographics, and just some other things that I like to change and set up to make modeling a little bit easier. So if you have a specific way you like to set your scene up, this video probably isn't going to help you out that much. But if you're new to modeling and you're not quite sure how to set up a scene to make it more conducive to model, you may learn something from this video. So we'll start. I have my blueprints here. I just found these off of Google. I actually have a 2016 4Runner, but the body style is pretty much the same. Mine doesn't have the hood scoop or the skid plate down here, but whenever we get to that part, I'll just walk outside and take some pictures, and we'll try to make it from there. But the first thing I like to do is set up my orthographic views, basically so they're all in one image. All the proportions line up properly, and they kind of resemble my Maya viewport. So if I jump over to Maya, I have just a little arrow that I made here, and if we look at our orthographic views here, you see that on the top left I have my top view facing down. In the front, I have the arrow is facing us, side view, facing to the left. And then we'll probably need a back view as well. And I'll show you how to make a new camera for that. But meanwhile, what I want to do is sort of make this image so it resembles my Maya scene. So I want to bring my front view down here. I want to bring my top view up to the top and rotate it 90 degrees so it's facing down. And then my side view is already facing in the right direction, so I could just move that over a little bit. So I just want to rearrange these so they better resemble. It's going to make it a little bit easier to set up in Maya. So I'm in Photoshop now. I'll start just by making my canvas quite a bit bigger, so we have a little bit more room to work with. And I can always crop it again later. And we'll make our background color. Oops. We'll make our background color white, so it looks a little bit like that. So I'll start by grabbing my top view. And I'm just going to Control C to copy, Control V to paste it, move it up top, Control T, which is free transform, rotate that 90 degrees. And it looks like we still don't have quite enough room up there. So we'll do a crop tool again and give ourselves a little bit more room. And then we can take our white here, Control T to free transform that and move it up as well. So I have my guides open in Photoshop. So to make sure those are up, just go to View, Rulers, and then once those are active, you can basically pull off guides. So this is going to be super useful for lining things up, making sure things are the correct proportions. So probably what I want to do is line the outer side mirrors up, and then this looks like it's pretty close to those correct proportions. So I'm not going to, let's zoom in a little bit to make sure. So yeah, this guy could come out just a tad more. And I can use my arrow keys to move that around a little bit, but that's pretty close. I mean, we can go further and maybe try to line up like the headlights, maybe the inside of the headlights, but so far I think that is pretty close, and it's good enough. It's good enough for me at this point. So next I want to get my side view in here. My side view is probably already proportioned and lined up properly. I can tell that just by dropping down a few more guides like that. So an easy way to get that guy in there. We want to keep the measurement in there because we're going to need that. So I'll copy, I'll paste, and then oops, make sure I have the right image selected. And then I can just move that guy over there. And I'm actually going to keep my bottom view down here where it is. So we can go to our crop tool again, and now, or my back view, sorry. So we'll crop this like that. And normally I'll have a bunch of other photo references set up. So this is a good opportunity to fill that space with your other photo references. So if you have like a 3/4 view or something like that, that way you have them in Maya to see them. So you don't have to go to, especially if you're working on only one monitor, you don't have to minimize Maya to look at your reference and then bring Maya back open. So you'll have them right there in Maya. So this is looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and save this out. And I'll save it as a JPEG. And for the time being, I'll just put this on my desktop. Whenever I get into Maya, I'll definitely create a project. So we'll just name this Forerunner Orthos. Save. High quality is probably good enough. And then we'll jump over to Maya. So I will start a new scene in Maya. And we'll go ahead and make a project. So I'll go to project window, and we'll go to new, and I'm going to name this modeling class, or let's call it 3D modeling class. Accept. Any second that'll kick in. And then we'll go ahead and, even though this scene is empty, we'll go ahead and say save scene. Actually, we need to set our project. So we'll go to File, Set Project. Set it to that 3D modeling class. And then we'll go to Save Scene. And we will save this scene as... let me make sure that I set that project right, because it doesn't look like it was set to the correct location. Yeah, I guess we just need to go in here and save this. So I'll save this out as Forerunner. And hit save. So before we bring in our image plane, I want to talk about some things that I like to do in Maya, just setting up my scene, getting it ready to model, getting it, sort of everything set, because Maya's default settings aren't always the best when it comes to modeling. So the first thing I want to look at is your perspective camera. So we'll just click on this little guy right here. That will open up our attributes for our camera. So the first thing I want to change is the focal length. The focal length by default is set to 35. I like setting this to 50 because that's closer to what we actually see with our eyes. And especially when you're modeling like heads or like human heads of any kind, it can get really weird, and it can actually affect the way you model if your perspective distortion isn't set up quite right. So the first thing I like to do is just set that to 50, and that will basically flatten out the perspective distortion a little bit so we don't get so much. The other thing that I like to do is change my near and far clip plane. Now this isn't going to be an issue if we're modeling something small. Even like the size of the car, it's just like something I like to change anyway, because I'll be zooming out and things like that. So let me explain a little bit what these settings are. Let's go back to our camera settings and look at our attribute editor. So basically, our working units are centimeters. So what this is saying is when we get 0.1 centimeter close to a model, it's going to clip out. So if I just create a sphere here, and we're going to get close to it, and eventually we're going to clip out of that. So that's what that near clip plane does. The far clip plane, whenever we get 10,000 centimeters away from something, it's going to clip out. So if we zoom out far enough, that just disappears. So it's not an issue with small objects, but when it comes to larger objects, it becomes a little bit of an issue. So let's say we're modeling something like the size of a football field. So we'll go to our channel box and edit our parameters or our attributes here a little bit. So I'll just take my subdivisions all the way down there. So I generally like to work in centimeters. I know some people will go in and change the settings a little bit to be feet or inches. The problems I've found with that is whenever you're jumping from application to application. So say you're modeling something to 3D print, and you change your working units to inches. By the way, that's going to be in your Windows settings, preferences. I believe it's just in your settings here. So you're going to change that to centimeters. The issue is that whenever you jump to say like a 3D printing software, if your units are set to feet, so say you have something that's 5 feet by 5 feet, and you move that to a 3D printing software, the type of unit that gets saved in your file doesn't get saved, just the number of units gets saved. So if you make something that's 5 feet and bring it into certain like game engines or 3D printing software, it's still going to see that as 1 centimeter or 1 millimeter depending on what its units are set to. So I make it a point to always just work in centimeters, or at least work in metric, because that makes it really easy. If I have my unit set to centimeters and I jump over to 3D printing software that's set to millimeters, I can just change that from 1 to 100 and it fixes the issue. It gets a little bit more difficult whenever you're working in feet. So I generally stay in metric units. Now, with that said, a good guideline is just remembering that 30 centimeters is about a foot. So if I were to make something the size of, say, a football field, 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters, so that's going to be a foot. So 100 feet would be 3,000 centimeters by 3,000 centimeters. And then 300 feet, which is about the size of a football field, would be 9,000 by 9,000. So now if we begin zooming out, see how large this thing is and see how quickly that's clipping out on us. So that is bad. So this is why I generally, one of the first things I'll do is I'll jump over to my camera settings and I'll set my far clip plane to something like ridiculous, like 100 million. Now the other issue you'll notice, we don't really see much here with this plane, but if I create a sphere, if I make a sphere this big, and I begin zooming out, at some point you're going to see some really weird stuff happening like that. And that can be solved by changing your near clip plane. So if we just change our near clip plane to like 1 centimeter instead of 0.1 centimeter, that's going to go away. So we no longer have that issue. Now, if you don't want to do this for every new scene that you create, you can jump over to your Windows settings, preferences, and I believe this is going to be in cameras, and you can change the default camera settings here. So we can change that to 1, and we can just add in 3 or 4 zeros there and save that. So now every scene that we create, that's going to be the default setting. So so that's a few things that I really like to do before I start modeling. And just to reiterate, that is basically all we did was change our focal length to 50, our near clip plane to 1, and our far clip plane to that looks like 1 billion or something. I don't know. These settings are basically old default settings from back when graphics cards or video cards just weren't that great, so it couldn't handle like really large scenes. But now Maya can handle millions of polygons with no problem, so we shouldn't have an issue with that. The next thing I like to do is to change the default material. Currently our default material is just a Lambert 1, and I find that the Lambert 1 is sort of bad for modeling because it has no specular reflectivity. It doesn't really show you contours. It doesn't show you the shapes very well. So so I like to change this default material. So as I'm creating new shapes or new pieces of a model, they'll all have that default material on them. So unfortunately, there's no way in the settings to change this. So we can't change it for every new scene that we create. You know, just when we open Maya, it'll always have that Lambert 1 default material. But what we can do is we can go into our hypershade and we'll grab our Lambert 1 material and we'll graph that material. And basically what you see here is an initial shading group. So this initial shading group is actually what gets applied to all of your default shapes. Anytime you create a new polygon, a new surface, a new NURBS, it gets this default initial shading group applied to it. So what we can do is we can just create something like a blend. And generally I like to make it a little bit darker than it is already, and you could probably increase the specularity if you want, but you shouldn't need to. And then we can just take this blend and disconnect it from its blend shading group and connect it to our initial shading group. And now you'll see that we have this nice dark blend applied to this sphere, and if I darken it, we can see that change there. And also any new shape that I make will also have that blend applied to it. So this is really useful for like patch modeling where you're constantly creating new objects. This way they'll all have that blend shader applied to it whenever they're created, and not that default Lambert 1, which can be kind of annoying. So those are some initial things that I like to do before I even begin modeling. Super helpful. It makes things a little bit easier to see, and it's just a little bit more conducive to modeling. I also usually, depending on what modeling methods I'm using, I'll create a new tool shelf. I'll show that in a different video because I'll probably be adding things as I'm using them and as I'm finding that I'm using them more and more. So for now, we'll not do that, but in the future, I will probably create my own tool shelf or toolbar. So next we can look at creating, bringing in our orthographic views and setting that up to start modeling. So before I do that, what I like to do is I create a cube, and we'll jump over to Photoshop and look at our dimensions. So I want to create a cube that is to the correct dimensions of our whatever it is we're modeling. Scale is very important in Maya. I see a lot of people modeling things to their grid size. So they'll model a house based off of the size of the grid, and then they try to light it or add dynamics like in cloth or things like that. It just doesn't work because you're basically applying these real world these dynamics that are based off of real world physics. You're applying them to like a 5-inch house or a 5-inch car, because that's about the size of our grid here. So before I start working on my orthographics, because I'm going to need to scale them up to the proper scale, I make a cube, and we're going to jump back over, look at our dimensions here. So 4,823, these are millimeters. So centimeters are, we're just going to move a decimal place. So this is going to be 482.3 instead of 4,000. So we will make our, let's see, that's going to be our side view. So that's going to be our X. So 482.3. You can see how much bigger that is than the grid, and that's to the proper scale. And then we can go look at our width, which is going to be 192.5. So that's going to be our Z depth. X, Y, Z, 192.5. And then our height is, so that says 18 there, but I believe it originally was 1816. So we'll jump back over, and our height is going to be 181.6. It doesn't have to be perfect. I do want to point that out. It just needs to be close. And then we'll jump over to, say, our 4-panel view, and we'll zoom out to where we can see all those guys. And I do want to move that to where it's just sitting right on top of the grid. And then I'm going to hit 4 on my keyboard, so I'm going into wireframe view. I do notice that it is facing the wrong direction here. So we do need to change that. So you see my front view is getting the side view. So we can just rotate that in Y 90 degrees. And now that should be correct. We'll eventually delete this. This is just so we get our orthographic views, the scale correct. All right, so we'll start with our front view. So we'll go to image plane, import image, bring that guy in, and we could start this in a sort of messy way. So I'll just scale it up until it fits in that box perfectly. Jump over to our front view. Let's probably scale it down a little. So I don't think it actually counts the roof rails up there. Maybe it does. Yeah, I think that's pretty close. Now I like to. I'm going to need to scale all of my other image planes to the same size. So we will look at this number here. We'll just round that up so we have a nice even 58 for all of those. So we can remember that. We can put that in the other image planes. And then for the side view, I want to get the position the same. So we're going to look at translate Y, which is 191. We'll just make that an even 191. And we'll make our translate X an even 255. So that way we're all working with even numbers here. So the next thing that I like to do here is drop the opacity a little bit. Just so it's not so bright. So to do that, I'm going to go to alpha gain, and we'll set our alpha gain to something like 0.5. And in the perspective view, I want to move my image plane back behind the model. Now the reason I want to do this is because if I'm at some point trying to select these vertices that are behind my image plane, I can't do that with the image plane sitting in the middle like that. So I need to move that back behind the model. And then if you want to have your image plane in your perspective view, you can, that's fine. I don't generally like to have it in my perspective view. So I'm going to go to the attribute editor and click under display, looking through camera, and that will only show that image plane in the camera that you created it in. So next we can jump to our side view and just repeat the process. So import image. I remembered those numbers that we scaled it up, so we're going to go over to the, see, click on that guy, go to scale. That's going to be 58. So now we have the proper scale. I believe translate Y on that is 191. We can bump that up to 191. And it should be in the perfect position. We just need to move it over until it fits in the box. And here, move it back so it's not in the middle of our model. We'll drop the alpha gain to 0.5 and then jump over to our attribute editor and click on looking through camera. And then we'll repeat the process for the top view. Go to view, image plane, import image, bring in our image, bump our scale up to 58. I believe the translate X on this is 255. So I'll change that to 255 and it should snap perfectly in place. And then I can just move it down till it fits in that box. Drop the alpha gain to 0.5. And it's already below our model, so that's okay. We don't really need to move that one. We'll go to our attribute editor, click on looking through camera, and now we just need to do our rear view. So I'm going to go ahead and save just in case Maya crashes on me. Sometimes it crashes in with these image planes whenever you're creating them for some reason. I haven't had it happen to me in 2018 yet, but it happened quite a bit in 2016 and 2017. So to create a new view, we go to panels and just any of our views here, and we can go to orthographic and new back. So see how that happened? That for some reason that's like a graphic glitch. If we close Maya and open it back up, those should pop back into place. But here we have our rear view, and we'll go to image, import image, select our image. We will scale that up to 58. There's our box there. See how we don't see it? That's because our camera, it's in front of our object. So this is our rear view camera right here, and our image plane is right on top of that. So in order for us to see that box, we need to move it back behind our model. So for this one, I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. I don't really think it's necessary for it to be perfect. Oops. Just sort of a guide. So I'll line that up the best I can. And then when we're not using this rear view, we can, well, let's first go ahead and drop that down to 0.5 and go to looking through camera. And then when we're not using this rear view, we can just go to panels, orthographic, side, and look at our side. So these aren't showing up, but I know as soon as I close Maya and open it back up, those will all pop into place. I'm going to save just to be sure. So now in our perspective view, we have all these green things. These are basically the cameras. For some reason, when you create image planes, it turns the visibility on for those. You'll see as you select them in the outliner, we see top, front, side. At this point, you can just select all of them and hit Control H, which is hide. And then I can delete my cube. So now I have all of my image planes set up. Let me, I'm going to pause the video and just reopen Maya, save it and reopen it, just so you can see all the image planes. So restarting Maya didn't solve that problem, but if you select your image plane here, if it's not showing up, if you just click on in all views and then go back to looking through camera, it will show up. So yeah, that's it for today. We have all of our image planes set up. We are ready to start modeling. I'll probably start with patch modeling the body. A lot of this series will be instructional videos on modeling specific things with certain techniques, and then I would like to do a live stream at some point. So as I'm sort of doing the busy work, I will probably try to live stream those, so people can jump in and comment and ask questions and things like that. But for the most part, this is going to be a video series that's all about modeling and different ways to model. You know, like patch modelings, booleans. We're going to try to go over every little technique, and I'll try to show you every little trick I have up my sleeve. If you have any suggestions, or if you want to see anything being modeled, please comment below. And I look forward to this video series. It should be a lot of fun. So I'll see you guys next time.